Welcome back to the Black and Brown Get Down podcast. I am your host, Mary D. Moran, and I have a very special person who is joining us. What's up, Nate?
How you doing? Good. All is well. All is well. Different to be in front of the camera this episode.
I know. So Nate is our director of Remembering, also does production of the podcast, but he was like, I think you should do this. I think you should do that. I said, I think you should come on in front of the camera because this is your jam. And so, last week we aired
the border panel. Yeah,
right.
Super
the border
powerful.
panel. Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out to New Orleans African American Museum for hosting us. I mean, yeah, that was super powerful. There's been a lot of good conversation that's happened just in our socials and in some of our reviews too. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I went to L.A. over the weekend. I was in San Francisco for the Hispanics in Philanthropy conference. And actually, one of the people who I feel like, I'm like, can I get into the juice right now?
Sure.
And it'll just be a little jumbled. But I feel like for the juice this week, I want to give it up to my guy who have you watched the Flamin Hot Cheetos documentary?
We have it saved because you sent us a message about it when you first met him. So I have it saved, so we're gonna look at it sometime this week. But I've heard very good things about it, from it being very serious and factual to also it being like comedic. I heard people say it was kind of funny, but it was a true story.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to it.
And so I guess the guy's name is Richard Montañez.
Okay.
And he's the person who created Flamin Hot Cheetos. I done saw a couple think pieces that said he didn't invent it, but I don't know. It's to be determined. Anyway, it's now in stone because he didn't. Let him have it.
Hulu said he invented it.
Right. And so much so, he was talking about the contract that he had. First of all, he has a lot of money. Like, I think he's a baby B.
Wow.
Or big B.
From
even before, because he was a vice president of either Coca-Cola or Pepsi or something like that.
Wow. I gotta get into it.
Yeah. And so he but started off as a janitor, and kind of worked his way up. He's Chicano, I think he's Mexican.
Wow.
And he talked about he's very, very charismatic. He talked about he went to school. He went to school when segregation ended, and he was one of the first people started to integrate schools. And he said that he was so embarrassed that his mom had packed him a burrito and everybody else had sandwiches. He over here with his aluminum foil ass burrito.
Listen.
And he said the first day he was embarrassed, and then like the second day he said his mom packed him 2 burritos. He said, this one's for you. You're not going to stop getting burritos. I'm not going to start making you sandwiches. But this one is for you to share with a friend.
Wow. And
he shared with a friend. And then after that, everybody was cool with the burritos.
Wow.
He's very, very charismatic. Obviously not sure if that's a true story or not, but makes sense.
Well, shout out to mom if it is.
Yeah, makes sense. And so, I'm excited about watching that documentary. Yeah. But I think just shout out to him for naming a couple of things within his contract. One, that he wanted a woman and a Latina to be the director.
Wow.
So this was not about money. This was, in fact, about how they wanted to produce this documentary, this film. And apparently there had to be a certain number of, like, Black and brown people involved. There had to be a certain number of like people in production that looked like this was about putting people on. And
Beautiful.
So, he gets the juice this week.
Beautiful. Yeah. I can't wait to check that out now. Just having that context, I already was looking forward to it.
And so it's on Hulu and I think Disney Plus or something.
I think so. Yep. I think I did see it on Disney. Yep.
And so, okay, cool. So that's that on that. Awesome. Putting you on. I mean, you wanted to share this with us. Yeah,
so Black Boys Ohm is an organization that operates out of the Bay Area of New Orleans. Shout out to them. And what Black Boys Ohm does is that they teach, primarily young elementary age and middle and high school age Black boys how to meditate and how to journal. and also just how to generally be in community with each other, right? Some of the founders actually go around to different metropolitan areas and to different community centers and teach these communities how to come together, how to harambe, how do we come in a circle, and how do we in community talk about things, right? And that goes way back to both black and brown cultures having these tribal talks, and so Healing Journal for Black Men is a book that they produced that I grabbed to just to check out. I've heard really good things about it, both from people on social media and also just close friends of mine. And a lot of my close friends are not journalists, so when they spoke very highly of this, I had to check it out. Shout out to LeBron, to my boy LeBron with Black Men Build in Los Angeles. They really put me onto this, and it's really just a lot of affirmations. It gives you writing space. There's a lot of talking points all about just relevant things for race. It gets into misogyny. It gets into some hard conversations. So I just love that it just sparks conversation and leaves room and gives you some prompts and some talking points for like brother-to-brother conversation and externally as well. So we're going to get into it with some of our remembering folks and some things that we're doing with OVNV. So I'm excited to dig into it with community. But yeah, definitely wanted to shout them out. Danny Fluker Jr., who is the writer of this and also one of the co-founders of Black Boys Own. But yeah, really, really dope. Definitely recommend it.
I love that. Thank you for that book. And I also wanted to, it's Black Music Month, so you have to come on and talk about this.
Black Music Month. Yeah, Black Music Month, which was started by Kenny Gamble, who was a famous songwriter. Gamble and Huff is a really famous soul songwriting duo out of Philadelphia. Okay. And so they got up with Diana Williams, who's actually the godmother of a friend of mine named Laia. So shout out to Laia. But Diana Williams, who was one of the first black publicists and one of the first black women radio DJs in a major market. So they got together with them. Gamble and Huff would travel around the different areas. They went to Nashville and they performed for the Country Music Month Association Festival sometime in the 70s. And so coming back to Philadelphia from Nashville, they were just kind of astounded by the unity that they saw, how the government had honored this genre of music that heavily pulled from black music. Yeah. And there was no sign of anybody black recognized in Nashville at this Country Music Month celebration. And so Huff got together with Diana Williams. They formed an organization to then kind of hold the government accountable for not only recognizing, black artists, but also funding. And so they were also responsible for the first fund that the city of Philadelphia gave primarily to black artists, which was, I think it's kind of credited as one of the first funds that a major city created specifically for black artists.
That's amazing.
So that was a huge
Shout out
thing
to them for that huge accomplishment.
Yes.
That's how we then get to the memes of, or like the social media campaign around there's different things for different days. One of them I think was like, what's one song that should have been a single that was like a
B-side or something like that.
Yeah, that was a B-side. So, but yeah, what are you listening to right now in terms of black music?
What am I listening to in terms of black music? I am really into the K Tramine, the K Tronada, and Amine album. Really digging that. I like the new SZA. Janelle's album. I need to give the entire thing a listen. I've heard half of it. I need to listen to the other half. Yeah. But Janelle, I've been a Janelle fan since before everybody else is just kind of hopping on. But she's been dope. She's been dope. And then I think locally New Orleans, like Fresh and Reckless is a young kind of viral group for their TikTok dances and videos, but also some pretty good music too. So they've been doing some really genre bending things, but still keeping it New Orleans. So I love that. Yeah. Okay. How about you?
I'm like,
who you bumping?
Last week, or what was it last week? Maybe. Yeah. I'm still on what came out last week. So Janelle Monáe.
Oh yeah.
I'm on also the Burna Boy, Sitting on Top of the World, kind of Brandy.
I saved that.
I'm trying to think what else. I think locally, I'm trying to think what I'm feeling. They had something at Dream House Lounge. It was called an intimate night or something, and T-Ray, the violinist, was there.
That's my boy.
Yeah,
talented
so he's
cat.
Right, St. Aug. Graduate, right?
Coming to a grounding rules near you.
Yeah. And so, he was there. So I'm excited. I've been listening to some of his stuff. But yeah, I think that it's Black Music Month. We need to just pay the full reverence.
Yes, all of it. The foundation.
The foundation. Yeah. Let's talk about that. It is actually the foundation. And so, I'm going to actually, maybe I'll participate in one of the things. Yeah. Put it up in my stories. Let's see. What else? There's the D. Wade, Gabrielle Union. We don't want to get too much into that. But I will say that it is, there's a lot going on, including maybe he triggered her by saying, this is my house or my house, something. Yeah. But, I think that how people manage their finances when they are in a relationship, and specifically a union, is not just one way. And so people manage their stuff 50-50. Listen, some people may not like it, but it works just fine for them. So let me mind my business and stay out of it.
Because they're good.
Because they're good.
They're good.
In fact, they look very happy.
They're good. And we always hear, Black people are not a monolith. And I think that means that in all the areas.
Yeah.
Brown people are not a monolith. That means that in all the areas. And so, like, what we see on TV or what we get presented is not the only option. Yeah. It works other ways, and I think kudos to them for speaking on it and really talking. Because again, I think
transparent. Because guess what? Yeah. It ain't none of our business.
Exactly. They could have said that, and they would have been right in their rightful place. Yeah. And, But I think some of those conversations are good to have because it shows people that looks like us. Like, okay, there are different options.
Maybe we'll have to have somebody on who can talk to us about finances and building wealth. And we typically stay away from like the monetary wealth. We've been kind of leaning on the cultural wealth, but maybe we need to bring somebody in. That'll be a good conversation to have with them.
A balance.
Okay, we are in my favorite segment, which is Black Love, Brown Pride. Today we have do we say La Doctora?
Yes. Lupe is fine.
Okay, Lupe is fine. Okay, we say La Doctora, Dr. Guadalupe García, or Lupe. And so thank you for coming. She's an associate professor at Tulane University in the history department. Yes. And we're going to just get an amazing conversation about colonialism, Cuba, all of the things. Yes. But I also just want to dig into and have some time for us to talk about, how you came into this work, your upbringing. So let's welcome Lupe to the pod.
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm super pumped. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. So our first question is always whose spirit do you bring to the work? Mm-hmm. And what are your first memories of community growing up?
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking that. I have two early memories of community that I think could be reinforced over the years. And so when I think of that question, my first real sort of memory of when looking back, I feel that sense of community was when I was really young, when I was a kid, and I grew up in East L.A. That's where my family is still to this day. And, I remember having Sunday daytime barbecues that would just last into the night.
Carne asada?
Yes, carne asada. And all the cousins
would come over. So where's your family from? Sorry.
So my father's from Mexico City. And my mother is from a little tiny town outside of Guadalajara. We usually say Guadalajara because no one's ever heard of it. But it's called Tenamazalan. And it's this biodiverse, rainforesty kind of place. But they're now in East L.A. and so that's where I grew up. And all the cousins.
I certainly thought you were Dominican.
That's the people's first go-to. We'll get into that. Yeah. And so so I remember everybody family coming over to our house, to cousin's house, to aunts and uncles' houses. And not everybody was blood related, right? We had my godparents would come, and we had adopted family that would come, and it was just a good time that would take us into the night, and kids would be acting crazy, and adults would be hanging out and drinking and talking, and it was beautiful and messy and all those things that community are. So that's my really earliest memory. And then as I got older, I think when I think of your question, when do you remember a community? I remember also again, growing up in East L.A. and sort of having a community of people around us that really would close rank when things happened, and when people needed one another, and so I remember that as well as being sort of very
What does
present.
that mean?
Okay. so specifically, like, I remember one incident where
I hear closing rank.
Yeah.
When I hear that, that's serious business. So
it is,
what does that look like? Yeah. And why would one close rank?
Well, because I think, people can act as protection for one another, right? As buffers for one another. And so we can celebrate joy, but we can also be around one another when shit hits the fan, right? And so I remember, like, one incident, one summer, one young neighbor who was killed, and the police came to tell his parents, and I just remember, like, all the older people and my mother and, like, everybody sort of running out and just, like, literally closing ranks, right? And so I remember that kind of, like, just resource that people were for one another. And it's been reinforced through the years. Like, my parents still live in that community. They live in that same house. They have the same neighbors. And, now they're the older people on the block now. Like, they were really young when we moved in. And so they're there now. And they're the kind of people now. They're the older people that sort of help everybody else.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. That was really rich. Now, I'm also from LA. And so I'd love to just, like, get off into some things in this LA bag. But one, I love East LA. I'm not from East LA. I grew up in South Central, later on moved to Pacoima, and but when we were in South Central, we were East Side.
Okay.
And so
I had cousins in South Central.
Huh?
I had cousins in South Central.
Right. Different from West Side, South Central people, right? West Side is what people typically think of when they think of South Central, which is Crenshaw, all of that, right? Leimert Park, all of that is West Side, South Central. Now, East Side is like closer to downtown, closer to the freeway, right? And we were right off of, like, Slauson and Figueroa. And so, but, later on, I moved back home for, like, a year after I went to school. And I lived in Little Tokyo.
Okay, yeah.
Which is right next door.
Yep.
To
almost walking distance.
Right. To your neighborhood. And so, and sometimes I would walk or, ride a bike, whatever, to, any of the things, right? The bars, I think there's a place, what is it called? Espacio 18 something. I'll get the name of it, but it's really, just kind of these dope community spots, and the Mariachi Plaza, like, just, really, really dope spots. The culture is so, you can feel it. And when we look at things like Gentefied, right, which I think is based in East LA, we see the richness of our culture.
Yes.
We see the richness of our people, of the intergenerational stuff that you were just talking about. And we see folks also getting pushed out. We see gentrification. But man, there's nothing like the culture that exists in East LA. And I always talk about this because I think about, just growing up, hip hop, yes, but like lowrider culture, everything from, I got my Cortez
You
on
do.
today.
I saw those when I walked in.
Yeah, but all of that, like Dickies, all of that, like, to me, that's informed from lowrider. Like, East LA informs a lot of our culture, not just brown, but like black, and so I don't know. Yeah. What does that say, or like, what does that mean to you?
Oh gosh, it's home, as fraught as that is, right? And I haven't lived in East LA, God, in like decades now, right? Because I left when I went to college. We were just talking about that. And then I went to North Carolina, and then I went to Florida, and then I came here. And so I've been gone a really long time. But it feels like the 80s when I go back. It feels like home. It feels like family. It feels like when I grew up, right? All those things that you're talking about. And yes, it's changing now. Gentrification is real. Boyle Heights, where Mariachi Plaza is is rapidly changing. East L.A. is still a little bit safeguarded from that, but
what
not
would
as
you
much.
Consider East L.A.?
So
for those geographically
like
challenged.
Belvedere Gardens, so east of Boyle Heights.
Yep. So going to Cal State LA.
Yes, yes. So, if you're driving from Boyle Heights or downtown,
but
into
not
Cal
like
State LA.
El Sereno.
No.
Right?
Then you're out of East LA. It's really small. It's teeny
Yep.
tiny, and
Yep.
and this is like me with my historian cap on now.
Yeah. I love it.
It was created in part because people think of it now as a predominantly Mexican or Latino community, right? But it was specifically a non-white space. It's always been that, and it's always managed to sort of be the community that it is, because it was a space where people who couldn't buy on the West Side, right, or couldn't buy in other places legally and financially, were there, and so it still has that character.
I love. I'll take a house anywhere in LA, right? But I feel like East LA or just that whole area. I feel like just give me a house in Glassell Park.
Oh yeah,
it's so pretty.
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
but everybody's discovered that, right?
Right. I'm like, man, it's so pretty. So yeah, I grew up also just carne asadas all the time. It's a Tuesday, we cooking, and it's too hot to cook in the house,
So you're cooking outside.
So we cooking outside, and the pot of beans is outside, and partly because not like here in Louisiana, but you don't have air conditioning in everybody's house.
Yes.
And so we cooking outside. What's your favorite part of a carne asada?
The carne.
Okay, so the meat.
Yeah, the carne. I love to eat, so for sure.
Now, it's always definitely the meat, but I love. We had hot dogs all the time, and not the bread, but just like the actual
hot dog. Yeah.
So I feel like I could eat that every day. I can. My parents always had corn, or always did plátano. So I always did just on the grill. I'm trying to think, what else do I love about it? Pico de gallo, I just, Salvadorian, so we didn't have hella hot sauce like that.
We had 2 or 3 different types.
Yeah. But I do now like it, but the green sauce is my favorite. Not the, it's mild.
I was going to say, you have to graduate up to the red one.
Right. I was, my parents worked a lot, but I was, once I got to middle school, was partly raised by my childhood friend and her family, and so shout out to the Pisano Osorios. I love y'all. So they introduced me to all the salsas, the cheese, all the things Mexican,
all the toppings,
the toppings, right? And it's like a pico de gallo, but it's got like nopales in it.
I love that.
It's intense, right? And I'm like, where's the ketchup? Right? They like, little girl,
there's no ketchup.
Go off. Right. But
the bacon on the hot dog. You remember that?
Right. Yeah. Right. I love a hot dog. I don't know why. It's just like my guilty pleasure. I love a bacon wrapped hot dog.
Yeah.
With like
a street vendor.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Making me hungry.
So I know. And every time I got skirt steak yesterday, which is kind of like the ranchera, right? And it just never hits the same.
No,
I got cilantro, like the things that I think are supposed to be.
You need the grill, you need the outside, you need the community.
No, I'm saying from a seasoning point of view, that shit ain't the same.
Well, okay, I have to say, because I grew up in East L.A., this is a little bit shameful, but because I grew up in East L.A., you could buy it at the carniceria.
Prepared.
Already, exactly. So you just put it on the grill. So
preparada. And I always, right. Yeah, anyway. Well, I wish they had it here. I definitely would not be getting it at nobody's ideal preparada. I don't know. Thoughts? You?
I love preparada. Like, you just put it
You get it here?
Oh, no, I don't get it here.
No. Oh, okay.
I don't. Is it good?
Or
Have you tried it?
Ideal.
Okay.
It's not ideal.
Okay. No, I've never done that.
Let me not shit on them people.
I've tried to make my own chicharrón, though.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, so you got
pork
the big
belly.
old
No, I don't. I don't have that.
That's your first problem.
Yeah, that's at home in East LA. But somebody told me pork belly. You can make a chicharrón, and it's not the same thing, but you could put it on the stove. It's close enough. Yeah.
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 I'm on a low carb situation right now, so I also
belly.
got pork rinds yesterday to snack on.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so you are from LA.
Yes.
You went to the Claremont colleges. We're not gonna dig into that because
we can.
We gonna move. We gonna move right past it. And then you said you went to Cal State L.A., which I love. I mean, everything from like the birth of Kwanzaa, as we understand, right? And it's drama around that, but we ain't gonna get into all that. But that was Cal State L.A.
Yeah,
that was not
absolutely
anywhere else. That was Cal State LA.
Yeah.
So like, thank y'all. Make sure y'all thank us for producing such things, because LA is just the home to so many things. Now, real quick before I get started, a lot of our listeners are from New Orleans, so they don't, have the same memories about LA. What are 3 movies, like quintessential LA movies,
oh God,
that people have to watch to get an understanding of
LA? Okay, so actually,
and if you want more broadly about Chicano Mexican culture, do you consider yourself Chicana?
I do.
Okay. Are you upper millennial like myself?
I'm an old. I'm an old person. I was born in the 70s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Gen, what is that?
Gen
X?
X? Yeah.
Okay, Gen X. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so movies. Oh gosh. So when I was growing up, Colors was a huge thing.
Colors, yes. If you have not watched Colors, yes.
Yeah, I actually remember going to
I
remember going to the movie theater to watch that. I remember going to the movie theater and
what movie theater did y'all go to? Or
Commerce.
drive-in?
No.
Okay.
Oh, well, we went to the drive-in as well. The one by Cal State LA, actually. But we went to the movie theater to watch that.
Is that the Paramount one? The one by Cal State LA? Oh,
Yeah.
we used to go there too.
Oh, really?
Come on. Yes, indeed. Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, those were treat nights when we could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the movie theater on Whittier Boulevard is what we would normally. My mom would take us to that one, and I remember seeing Colors there. With police like outside because they were like is something gonna happen? There was all that kind of stuff around it as well. So Colors, the movie that I don't remember now what year it came out with, but El Norte, which my people will tell you, like, I think it was one of the inspirations that got me through writing my dissertation, honestly. I used to watch that movie over and over, and like I show it to my students now who haven't seen it. And I still think it resonates to this day. So El Norte would be one if people don't know it, Gregory Nava. And then, oh gosh, other fun LA movies. Die Hard, Valley Girl. You just want like an idea of Los Angeles. Yeah.
So I didn't hear you say, let me think, Blood In, Blood Out, which is...
Yeah,
East L.A.
It is East L.A. I think oftentimes...
Or what's the one Jennifer Lopez is in?
Oh my gosh. Actually, I changed my answer. I would include that one as number 3.
That one is good. That one is good.
Yes.
It's really beautiful. Mi Familia.
I show that to my students too. And sometimes I've taught like high school kids who are like getting ready for college, and I show them that movie.
Yeah.
Jennifer Lopez's early works, but Mi Familia is excellent. Yeah.
Now, this one is based in San Francisco, but I would also say La Misión.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that in a while.
It's beautiful, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's Pride Month, so let's
Yeah.
get off into that, you know. But yeah, so is it The Mission or La Misión? I think it's La Misión.
It's La Misión, also The Mission.
Yeah. So Benjamin Bratt is in that one, and it's really beautiful. But yeah, as someone who is not Mexican, I got a lot of shit for not being Mexican.
In LA?
Man, y'all are brutal. Y'all not playing games. Y'all not playing games at all. It's like, so, but when I met you, I did not think you were Mexican. In fact, when I saw your picture, I was like, oh, yeah. Lupita is not Lupita, because that's for the Mexicans. That's Mexican.
I was going to say, my name is always a dead giveaway.
Yeah, Guadalupe. I was like, damn. I was like, it's giving Mexican, but I was like, she's giving Dominican. Like, what's happening? So tell me, you know, I would love to just hear, you know, especially you said that you were in Florida for a while. I'm sure people, you know, perceived you as anything but Mexican.
Yeah, I think usually anytime.
And I love to talk about race in Latin America, or just,
for sure,
you know,
well, this is what I was
relates
to. I could segue right into that. You know, one of the things that I do as a professor, as a teacher, right, is I teach courses in colonial Latin America. And so one of the things that I kind of start off with, right, when we talk about conquest and colonization, is that Spanish America, Mexico, what is today Mexico City, was the epicenter for the slave trade, right? Not Veracruz, not Campeche, not all the things that we tend to associate now.
Not you coming for the peninsula.
Yeah, like before Cuba, before the Caribbean, sugar producing, tobacco producing, coffee growing, it was Spanish America.
Come on, let's go. This is going to be good. All right, come on.
So yeah, so there is a history there, right?
Now, why Mexico City?
Why Mexico City in terms of colonization?
Yeah.
Because it was the heart of the Aztec Empire. And so...
And what year are we talking about?
We're talking about 16th century, like 1520s.
Oh, come on.
Yeah.
See, look, when you get with a scholar, you can talk scholarly things.
It was...
I'm feeling very scholarly right now.
Yeah, like folks moved from the Caribbean.
So 16th century.
16th century.
And Mexico City. So when I think about Mexico City now, I always like boast about it, right? So one, I want to get into all that, but like from a non-Mexican, I was just like, man, like, why does people walk like they just own this shit? And it's like, yeah, because they do. One, right? Like, you're in California, you're in L.A., kid. But there's this air about Mexicans. It's just like, y'all float when y'all walk, you know.
In L.A. and Mexico.
I think, well, to me, in L.A., I know more Mexicans from L.A.,
from
you know,
than anywhere else,
than actually being in Mexico. But, you know, I think it's just beautiful. But once I was able to spend time in Mexico, but specifically in Mexico City, I was just like, oh, it makes sense.
Yes.
Like, this is vast. It's expansive. It's beautiful. It's brilliant. It's past, present, and future. It's one of the best cities you'll ever go to in your life. To me, it kills Paris. It kills New York City. It kills, like, these great cities that people think, like, go to Mexico City and your mind will be fucking blown.
I love Mexico City, and I actually didn't go there as an adult until I went there about 15 years ago with my entire family minus one brother. So both my parents, my father who's from Mexico City, and similarly, my mind was blown. Chilango, yeah. My mind was blown. We traveled back to Mexico, or to Mexico, because I was born in L.A., often-ish with my parents, but we always went to my mother's town. My father didn't go back to Mexico until about 40 years after he'd left, if not more.
Wow.
So that, like, just watching that was pretty, like, amazing.
So that means your parents migrated to California
My father migrated in the 60s. My mother came later.
Okay.
They met in Mexico. My father traveled back to my mom's little tiny town with a friend of his. He was already in the States. He was working in the States. He went back for like regional Christmas festivals and met my mother there. Had a relationship, came back here, got married, all of that good stuff.
Like, he knows vamos.
He knows vamos. No, he basically said he knows vamos.
Right. Tonight, baby girl, grab your stuff.
My grandfather was like, no, you don't.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to, let's get into the scholarship bag. Okay, 16th century.
So 16th century,
so
Mexico
who are we
City.
talking about colonizing and coming through using Mexico City as a portway? And why would Mexico City allow that?
Well, so we're talking first contact the Caribbean, right? And the gold that Europeans believed was there just didn't materialize in the ways that they thought it was going to. And so I have this anecdote that I talk about when it's like, yes, there is gold, it's over there, it's over there, it's over there. Like, keep going, get out of here, right? And so they do keep going. They hear these tales of, you know, lands filled with gold, Mexico City, Aztec civilization, and that's where they head off to, right? And so they come to Mexico City first. They come to Tenochtitlan.
Come on, Tenochtitlan.
That's where they go.
That
right?
is
before they go to the Inca
now
Empire.
the Aztec name for the city, right? For Mexico City.
And that's where it happens, right? That's where you have the battles. That's where you have, quote unquote conquest. That's where you have the end of the Aztec Empire, the Nahua Empire that we now call the Aztec Empire, right? And so they move from there. That becomes the new base of colonization. That's where they want to go. That's where labor is. That's where gold is. That's where tribute is, right? And so that is where Europeans want to be.
Dig into that.
So bullion, things that they can melt down into gold and silver that they can send back. Feathers, precious jewels, precious stones. Feathers becomes like, a way of adornment, something to show the empire, right, of what is in these lands.
So they just stole our shit.
They really did. And if you go back to Spain, you can see it because they still have it. That's the other thing. Yeah. And so one of the things that very quickly comes about is the crown saying, you need a reason to enslave people.
And by the crown, we don't mean the Crown, the series on Netflix.
We do not.
But we do, in fact, mean...
the Spanish crown, the empire. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, so you have just to give people a sense of, you have the Aztec Empire, but it's also a part of the Mexica kind of, when we think about Mesoamerica, which extends all the way down through Central America. You wouldn't count South America like the Peruvian.
No, it's a different empire.
Okay, that's a different empire. Okay, so through Central America, but at that time, where are the Mayans?
So Central America as well, but we also have civilizations that are like melding into one another as well, right? And all of these civilizations that we now tend to think of as Mayan or Aztec are really made up of different peoples as well.
Correct.
Right?
Different.
Yeah.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying though, but the Aztec Empire was the last empire.
Last empire in terms of...
if we're thinking about like kind of what's happening in Maya land.
Yes, it's an older... it's a younger empire than the Maya one. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay. So then they come through Tenochtitlan, and then they do what?
They... and battles ensue. They move on to colonization and colonialism as we understand it now, right? So to establish themselves. But the difference is the Aztec Empire is an empire, like make no mistake, right? Like it's an indigenous empire, but it is also a colonizing force, right? Into Central America, into other places outside of Mexico City, what is now Mexico City. The difference is that for the Europeans, empire is all or nothing, right? It is conquest in the true sense of the word. It is annihilation, right? And that's not something that was there before the Europeans in that same way. And so what happens then is that we have two very different worldviews that are colliding, and warfare doesn't mean the same thing. Winning doesn't mean the same thing, right? And so one of the things that happens is as we have the downfall of the Aztec nobility, the Nahua nobility, right? To be Aztec means to be in the city and to be a sort of part of the elite. What we have then
Which is huge.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because you may have the more rural ruins, but this is the biggest.
Exactly, yes.
The biggest.
And the people that are outside of that traza, that city center, they're tribute paying, right? So you always got to pay, right? Like they're tribute paying. And so when the Spanish come in, it's a different form of tribute, but it's still tribute paying, right? And so the transition, however, becomes a starker one when we have the imposition of a government and a law and a racial hierarchy that didn't exist before. That's the difference, right? And so you have these laws that say you can't enslave the indigenous, you must Christianize, right? This is one of the covers for colonization.
But you can enslave the black people. And at that point, we had black people in Mexico, in that space.
Yeah. And so this is the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, right? This is the beginning of a very different type of slavery that begins in the Americas. So slavery
existed there prior to?
Yes, absolutely. It exists in the Americas. It exists outside of the Americas. It's existed, right? But not...
So the enslavement of... Africans existed in Mexico and throughout Central America and the Caribbean prior to the transatlantic slave trade.
prior to the growth of the transatlantic slave trade. So one of the things that we get with colonialism is a slavery that is biological, that is hereditary, right? That doesn't exist prior to colonization. Colonization helps to instill that. It instills that. Yeah. And
when you say it instills it, can you go deeper? Just
you have laws that put it into place. You have practices. You have courts. It becomes a way of ruling, in a way of exacting tribute and everything that goes back to Spain, back to Europe. And we get hundreds of years and centuries of that kind of rule through colonialism ever after. Yeah.
You the one, Lupita.
Oh, okay.
You the one. You the one for me. Man.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're now at this place where we... everything is rapidly changing. Not just why do you think people don't and I don't know that it's a point of pride at all, but right, but I think to understand that was really the first heart of like how everything moved, we would understand more of the positionality of Mexico. And Mexico is just vast. It's huge. And I think that when you spend time on the East Coast, it's everything from Trump to everybody. Like when you think about the word Mexican, oh, you Mexican, you Mexican, you Mexican, it's like it's the worst thing to be. And I'm just like, nah, y'all don't understand Mexico. Like you certainly don't understand how important Mexico is. And how rich Mexico is, and what people have been willing to do to like have control and power over Mexico.
Yeah, and I think we see it. It's a truncated view, right? And we see it from the vantage point of the U.S., right? And I think to your point of like growing up not Mexican in Mexico, in L.A., right? Like even growing up Mexican, right, in East L.A., you still see the vastness and the diversity of Mexico play out in those spaces, right? I remember being a kid and having seen for the first time not just Central American immigration into Los Angeles, but also a very different Mexican immigration, right? That looked very different, that seemed very different, that people were Mexican talked about very differently, right?
Because before you had kind of like the braceros,
yeah,
right?
It was the bracero program, which was predominantly norteño.
And so northern Mexico. But what's the time period on that?
So 60s, 70s. I think that's
60s and 70s.
And you have an older, obviously like an older migration from Mexico, right? But once we start to legalize indigenous people in those kind of northern. Absolutely, yeah. It's significantly whiter.
Yep.
Right, and so in the 80s, 90s, all of this starts to change. In the 2000s, it starts to change. In the 90s, with Chiapas and having the Zapatista rebellion and all of those things, it makes it so that there's a different demographic now coming in, right? And you hear, I growing up there start to hear, right, like people talking about Mexicans differently, right? Because now
even within the Mexican
community, yeah.
So like what kind of things would we hear?
So basically saying like, oh, like, but those people are from like southern Mexico, right? Like, oh, those people are more indigenous, right? And it's people that look like us, right? And so even within a community that is, quote unquote Mexican, you still have a really great big diversity, right? And you see things like prejudices and racism inside of those communities, right? It's not. You see, it's still there, regardless of whether it's all quote unquote Mexican. Yeah.
Wow. I think the last thing that we've been hearing, especially coming out of L.A. with Nuri Martinez and stuff, right? She's talking about indigenous people, and she's Mexican herself. And she's talking about Oaxaqueños, right? Who, indigenous people who, like, our views about indigenous people are, they are indios, they're dumb, they're, not educated, they are, I don't know, ugly is what she said. And it's so crazy because my ideas and views about who we are as indigenous people is like, you know, completely the opposite. We were just talking, I was just home this past weekend, and our family is from El Salvador on my dad's side, but originally, I guess, you know, are from Guatemala. And so there's this war, or not war, but like this conversation within the family, though. No, we're not really from Guatemala. No, we're not really indigenous. What are you talking about? Your mother, who kept practices, has said, you know, and then it's always like, who's the most educated and knowledgeable one in the family? And whoever can like read and write the most, they get to say, no, yeah, we were, you know, from this area, and they're the keepers of the history, right?
Yeah.
And so, how did you become the history keeper?
I don't know that my family would agree that I'm the history keeper, but yeah. So, if you're asking in terms of like my professional,
I think side, your profession and I think it'd be interesting to hear what that sounds like in your family.
Oh God, I can tell you what it sounds like in my family. So,
and what's your position? Do you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I have two brothers, an older brother and a younger brother. So I'm the middle child and the only girl. My father's from Mexico City, like I said, he's Chilango. And the part of Mexico City, when I finally get there as an adult, right, like 15 years ago, we go into this little town, and it's like way up in the mountains, like near Xochimilco, and like
Xochimilco's beautiful.
Oh, it really is, and the geographic diversity in Mexico City is also pretty amazing. And so we're in this cab, and we're like going through the mountains, and my dad's trying to give them directions, and you know, you're like, oh God, is the car gonna roll back? Yeah. And so we finally make it. We see the family. It's like this big reunion, and I'm looking around, and the first thing, like, there's signs for these fiestas, for the religious holidays that are not in Spanish, right? And I'm like, what? And there's all these flowers, and it looks like Catholicism, but not. And then I walk into a church, and there's like images, the kind of images that you would see in a church, except that they're far more indigenous and far blacker. Yeah. And you're like, what? And then you're like, of course, because if the colonizer comes, this is where I'm going to run to, right? Like, it's this like mountain town that's difficult to get to, and the terrain is harsh, and this is where I'm going to go hide, right? And I think that's where people went to hide, right?
And no different than if we're talking about the Caribbean, the maroons,
exactly,
the caves, right, and all that. Like we're running to the bush. We're going to the bush to hide.
Exactly, yeah. And then Mexico City grows, and it swallows all of that up, right? Yeah. And so when I tell my brother, like, there are black people here, right? And it makes sense because this is where 2/3 of the slave trade was directed towards, right? They're like, I'm gonna tell Mom you said grandma was black. Right?
And you're like, no, but she was.
Exactly.
Based off of the research, right?
Well, exactly. Based off the research alone, based off the history. And then, you know, I'm in grad school, and I have a friend of mine who's like going through the family pictures, and she was like, that looks like my grandma, and she's Black American, right? Like, and so it tells you, like, there's this history that we share across the Americas that we don't tend to think of as shared because empires came in and divided the land, right? But it's the same people. Yeah, so that's what it looks like to be the historian of my family. What it looks like.
You're giving all the, I mean, that's what it looks like for me as well on some level, right? It's just like you're talking about this stuff, and kind of it's more contextual knowledge of, like, you know, what's happening around us, and they're like, nah, there's no way. Like, my aunt, I'll have to show you a picture who I love. Love you, Tia Tancho, who doesn't watch this pod, but she's just like, no, like, you know, our people come from Spain. I was like, ma'am,
really?
Ain't not one of us look like we come from Spain. And I'm just like, you're 80 years old. Like, why are you still holding this? You know? And she's literally 80. Yeah. And I love her. And I'm just like, ma'am, who from Spain? Can you say their name? Because I don't know a single one. So, but yeah, we're so anti-black. We just and I guess because that means then that you have a particular history, and that why do you think people are so anti-black in Latin America?
Colonialism. And here, like...
And just so, this pod has all the range of all the things. Break down colonialism in, as if you were maybe talking to one of your nieces.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I have to say my niece, her mother is also a professor, and shout out to my best friend Lisa.
We talk about different type of niece. Let's think of your nephew. Right.
Colonialism. Okay, so it's the imposition of European rule that creates racial hierarchy, that brings slavery, and I think, again, shout out to my best friend Lisa, who has argued this for years, right? Also codes the Americas such that it folds indigenous people into blackness, right? And this is her argument. She has a great book coming out. And I think, when I...
Lisa what?
Lisa Calvente at UNC, yeah. And so I think when she and I, we went to grad school together, and when we first started having these conversations, I was like, but there's these different cultures, and there's a different culture. And I think one of the things that I've seen as I've carried forward in the profession, and as I look back on the work, and as I look back on the conversations happening in places like Los Angeles amongst Mexican in relation to other Mexicans that are indigenous, right? The terminology, the ways of thinking about people.
Othering.
Yes, absolutely. That can only be explained through that, right?
Yeah.
And so, I remember my grandmother calling her grandkids, myself included, by these names, like Cambujo, for example, that come from 17th century colonialism, right? And they refer specifically to the progeny of people who, of mixed African and indigenous people. Yeah. Right? And so those legacies, I think, stay with us. It's an imposition of those hierarchies. And I think I've learned so much from friends and colleagues who work on these issues, right? I'm just a little colonial historian. I think people who are far smarter, far more into the literature, who make these arguments, and we see that play out in the present day. It's powerful.
If someone's trying to learn about colonialism, what's just like the first place they should start? Beyond Google.
Beyond Google, gosh. What would I say? There's so much wonderful work out there. I have to get back to you.
This is where you shout out one of your books.
Oh God, no! I don't think my book is the best one. I think that there's so much great works that talk about colonialism in the Caribbean, colonialism in New Spain, what becomes Mexico City. I know that you all do the shout outs with the books, which I think is really cool.
And we're going to do that. Yeah, you got to get us, we got to get your books. We're going to order them so that we can talk about them next time. Because I think there's so much for us to learn about. Once I started, how I was politicized at a very young age. Which I want to say it's the experience of most kids in L.A., but maybe it's not. But in middle school, I remember I was a part of, and throughout, not just middle school, but middle school up, it was just like, I was always, not Mexican, but I was always a part of Mecha, Were you a part of Mecha?
I was never a part of Mecha, and
Oh, okay. So, for those who don't know, so Mecha is, how would you describe it? It's like a student group, right?
It's a student
that's connected
group
to a student movement in LA.
And then I think served and I was sort of very on purpose not a part of Mecha. That served a very, I think, important political purpose in the 1970s. But that I think as immigration, especially to Los Angeles, diversified, I think became sort of exclusionary of 100%. Those other, And so by the time I was old enough to be involved, I did not want to be a part of Mecha.
Yep.
Also on the books, Franklin Knight. I think I would do Franklin Knight's The Caribbean.
Okay, nice. Yeah. I love that. Thank you. So the Mecha, right, which definitely political, but also has this cosmic stuff
cosmic race thing going
cosmic
on.
Race thing, yeah. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. So similarly, when I was young, middle school, I kind of discovered all this, right? And so La Raza Cósmica, the cosmic race, which is a huge thing. It was something that was very out there with Mecha as well. And so this idea that we are living in the fifth sun, that we are the children of the fifth sun, right? And the fifth sun being the last and final sort of era that the Aztecs predict as this world, right? There's nothing after the fifth sun. It is literally the end of the world. So we are living in this sort of last sun, last era of humanity, and seeing everything that comes with that.
And that wasn't in 1999. That was like
right. Right.
But anyway, okay, so Mecha, but also part of like BSU, right? Black Student Union, and always kind of had this duality of being a part of both of these groups, and All African People's Revolutionary Party, et cetera, et cetera. But all that to say that like people were, that I was around at least, I feel like there was enough elders, there was enough like mentors and people at all these like Mecha meetings and stuff. It was people who had graduated years before who would still come to the high school to hang out at the high school and mentor these young people. And so it was like I learned so much, but really I learned how to really have my chin up. Like have my chest out, and that it being brown, being black, it was something of beauty, of elegance, of like we were hard, like, and I think that that's something that can happen a lot when we learn that like there's such beauty in who we are, and colonization fucked us up. So that's why I think that people, once we get the language and those groups really helped me kind of have some language around like, okay, what is happening, what's my experience in in LA at this particular time. So you grew up in the 70s. You grew up in, you were born in the 70s. You grew up in the 80s. What high school did you go to?
Garfield High School in
You
East
went
L.A.
to the Garfield High School.
I really did, yeah.
And so,
Miss Galante was my professor.
Or
my teacher, yeah.
Really? So, okay, what's that? That movie is not Higher Learning.
Stand and Deliver.
That's the black version of Stand and Deliver. And Stand and Deliver is the brown version of Higher Learning.
Yep.
So get off into that. Okay, so what was I asking? Sorry, I'm so excited. Garfield High School. Jaime Escalante. This is crazy, by the way. Lupita, you really the one. Okay, so a whole movie is made off of this. First of all, that's a great movie. People should watch that too.
It is a good movie.
People should definitely watch that. We said, what's the name of it again? Shit, I forgot.
Stand and Deliver.
Stand and Deliver. I was gonna say Higher Learning again. Okay, so Stand and Deliver. You're in at Garfield High School. What year did you graduate?
93.
93. Okay. What is happening? What was Jaime Escalante really Jaime?
Yes,
Escalante?
He
was that man. He was that dude.
He really was, and I, as a teacher now, right? Like the man could teach. that was true. But this is I was there after the movie had already come out, and so.
He was still teaching.
He was still teaching, but he wasn't there all the time, which was that was the downside, right? He was off doing like speaker engagements and raising money, that kind of stuff. So we didn't get him all the time. But growing up there in East L.A. and going to Garfield High School, I think one of the things that it was really powerful was being taught by Black and brown teachers. I think that I remember even before Garfield High School. Being in East LA, I think I had a formative experience in public school. Like I'm a public school kid. Teachers who were really invested and made a commitment and a choice to teach in East LA.
Yeah,
I was in special ed for years when I was a kid because I didn't speak English, and so and I was a really quiet and shy kid, and so. We laugh about it now, but I was in special ed, and I kind of went off and did like other learning, and I would help the special ed teacher help special ed kids because I could function fine, I could read fine, just not in English, right? And it was a substitute teacher Johnny Walker from South Central, who was like, why are you in special ed? Like, you can read, you can do math, like, what's going on? And had me retested. That's how I, got into a regular reading class.
And he was a substitute teacher.
He was.
Shout out to Johnny Walker.
Johnny
Walker, if you are out there, feel free to contact us and dip into the DMs because we want to hear your story. We want to talk about what is happening and how, as a substitute teacher, you know that you have the authority to be an advocate for young children. And so that's amazing. That should tell everybody right now, you have the power to speak on behalf of someone.
Absolutely. And it was those early years in elementary when I had white teachers, and that's when I was sort of sidelined into special ed. And I remember it was 4th grade when I was retested, so all those years, right? And this is my first instance of really knowing racism. My 4th grade teacher called me up, and our special ed teacher would come and take the kids. And there was one day when I wasn't called out to go, and I was like, what's going on? I want to go with Ms. Mendez too. And my 4th grade teacher called me up and was like, you're not going anymore. And I was like, oh my God, what happened? And she was like, well, we got your test results back, and you did better than everybody, including Allison. Allison was the only white child in that school. And I was like, oh, okay, I can read better than Allison. Of course I did, right? Like, and so, yeah, I remember those moments of understanding as a kid,
Wow. Not Allison. Allison. Yeah. And how does it feel now that you, like, I'm a whole doctor out here in these streets?
How does it feel?
Do you feel it?
Not really. I mean, no, not really. I think I'm, just still.
Because Tulane's a pretty important institution to be at. In that world.
In that world.
Yeah.
I'm blessed to have a position, right, that pays my bills and feeds me and does all of those things and allows me to do the things that I, hope and want to do. But it's hard, right? Because I think one of the things that got me into this profession was wanting to look into our history, was wanting to have a different version of it, was wanting to teach, right? And the academy requires something very different. And, just like, we were talking about the Claremont earlier, and Tulane has been a little bit more of that.
Yeah.
So it's been hard.
Yeah.
And it's been also really great, though, to remember, right? To remember the things that were important to me that got me in this profession to begin with, right?
How did you get interested in Cuba? So a large part of your research is based in Havana, right? And so I actually, in 2007, did study abroad in Cuba, but I was in Santiago de Cuba.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
So
it's totally different.
Very different,
Side of the
yes.
island,
Very different part of Cuba, yeah. So I went on, when I was at Cal State L.A., I was doing my MA work on Mexico. My MA thesis is on Mexico. And a group of professors brought a few of us out to Havana. And I remember landing at the Jose Marti International Airport and getting off and walking around the city the following day and just looking around and being like, wow, I'm in this city where there are no advertisements, right? Like no sort of corporate advertisements, no Coca-Cola, no Hershey's, none of those things exist, right? And people related to one another so differently, right? And so it was such an amazing experience, and the monuments that were in the city and the way that people honored those and the history that was literally written on the city, in the city, was just so fascinating to me, and it spoke to something bigger, right? Yeah. That was being put out there in Havana for all of us to see and be a part of. Yeah. And that's what got me into wanting to work on Havana. Yeah.
Yeah. It's if you've never been to Cuba, it's I think you just described it pretty well.
Yeah.
And that was one of the first things that I realized, which is man, like I'm really, like you can go to another country, but there's still parts of it that feel like you're in the
very
States.
Close.
Yeah.
And familiar.
And this, you're like, nah, I'm not in I'm in Cuba, and what I did was a comparative analysis through education as an institution from Cuba to the States, and everything from like early childhood development and like how they taught the ideals of the revolution within education, right? So everything from if your early childhood development, right, you're never eating alone as a baby, right? You have like
someone's gonna come, and
exactly, and there might be high chairs, but they're three stuck together. You're in community, and so like these ideas that are very central to the revolution. So were you studying colonialism in Havana?
So not when I first arrived at Cuban studies. I was looking at contemporary Havana, and I was looking at urban space and the way that it functioned to organize historical memory. So the use of monuments in public spaces and how it was that they retold a history. And then I just kind of got sucked in and got pulled back further and further and further into the history of Havana. And by the time I got to Chapel Hill to do my PhD work, I felt like I couldn't understand the city unless I went further back. And so I started going further back, and by the time I finished my PhD work and had written a dissertation on Havana that really started in the 19th century, and I was writing the book, I still felt like I couldn't understand 19th century Havana until I went further back. Colonialism. Right? And until I landed at the literal founding of the city, how it was in 1519, and before that Europeans sort of carved up the island, how it is that they claimed space, how it was that they organized people, right? How it was that they organized the city itself into different areas, into different trazas, to further colonial interests.
We often remind people, kind of in the conscious space, like, feel free to take up space, take up space, take up space. What does it mean if you had to just tell us the difference between taking up space as Black and brown people versus how Europeans take up space? Or, within the colonial systems? And we're talking about two different units, right? Maybe an individual or a community unit versus like a... But I think it'd just be interesting to hear it.
I think when it comes to this European colonial way of taking up space, it is quite literally about territory. It is about naming, designating, legislating, right? It is, this belongs to me. It no longer belongs to you.
La Plaza de Castillo.
Exactly, right? And it's not even that it belonged to you previously, because that's not how people related to space. Right, but it is specifically that it now belongs to us as Europeans. That's the difference, I think, as opposed to the community and how the community utilizes the space as opposed to claiming it.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Intense. If there's any young scholars out there, I mean, do people get geeked, like, in your courses? I feel like, are people
geeked out about it?
Yeah, like, is this something young people are interested in?
Yes, absolutely. I think I see that in my undergrads. I see that in my grad students, that we can sit there and, class can go on and you're just having these conversations that you're like, I would do this for free just because
this is good. Yeah. This is good. Now, I'm curious to, back to Cuba real quick. What's the, as we think of, that's Taino Arawak land. What does it look like now for, because I know we think of very much so like kind of Black Afro-Cubans. What does it look like? Is that not an existing just kind of group of people?
Taino Naraks?
Yeah. In Cuba now? I
think there are places where, if you talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, like that's like more indigenous, it's over there, like that's where the culture survives. I think it's everywhere, right? And I think, yes, for sure, like colonialism meant that a large portion, 70, 80% of the indigenous population either, was also enslaved, even though there were laws against it. Those laws changed. People were coded as Black, right? Yeah. They were enslaved, they died, epidemics were a thing. All of those things were true. But I also think, people found ways to have relationships and community and carry on, right? And so that is still very much a part of Cuba that whether it's through symbolism, and sometimes it's problematic symbolism, right? It's problematic symbolism that sort of extols the native and like, you know, does this to like the African, right? But it's still a part of, I think, Cuban identity. The Afro-Cuban, for obvious reasons, is a big part of it. It is also the part that gets really focused on when we talk about like things like tourism, right? Yeah.
Earlier, you talked about being in Mexico, I think in your dad's town, and seeing some of the like kind of cross between Catholicism and maybe indigeneity. And then, of course, in Cuba, we see the cross between Catholicism and like Santeria and African traditional religion and spirituality. Curious to see like what you see that mirrors and what you see that's different. I see a lot that mirrors. We call it different things, right? And I think that's one of the biggest markers of difference, the language that we use to describe both. But to give you an example, when I was in my father's town, there were altars that look a lot like the altars that are in Cuba, right? The pictures of the people also look very similar, right? And the saints in the churches in my father's town, they were black. Yeah. They were black with long hair, but they were black, right? And so I think even though we call them different things, they're oftentimes coming from the same place, right? And it's the same peoples that are moving across the Americas, right? Yeah. We go from the 17th century to the 18th century, now it's Caribbean, right? And so we still have those same cultures that are present in Mexico City just as they are in Cuba. We've just learned to call them different things. They've mixed differently. My grandmother, my father's mother, who was from Mexico City, you know, when we were kids, there were ceremonies, right? Like when I was sick, like, you know, they're like, you don't need a doctor, like we're going to do these things instead. And they look like ceremonies that are performed in Cuba, right? And so oftentimes it's drawing from the same kind of cultural memories of people that are across the Americas and that come from Africa. We tend to, you just said the Americas, and this just reminds me, we talk about people from the U.S. being Americans. Yes. And then we see and think about Latin America and the Americas. Talk to us a little bit about that. Yeah, so it's one of the first things that I do in like my intro to Latin America class. When we use the term America, right, it refers to the body of land that is not the United States, right? And that's one of the first things that my students are like, wait, what? Because the Americas are the entire hemisphere, right? And the U.S. is something different. Canada included. Canada included, yes, it's the Americas. Right. Yeah. They call themselves Canadians. They really Americans. No, I'm playing. I'm playing. But, I'm so interested in, like, this is something, I might need to come take your courses. Please come. Yeah, I feel like I need to, you know, just sit in. I can't pay them well, I'm not course fees. Right. But I think everyone needs to learn this. And I think the more understanding we have of dates, of, you know, information of, you know, what is happening around us. You have made me miss being in the pages and not, being in the book. Because I remember just being so excited and so amazed, and also knowing that wasn't my calling, because the type of narrative change and like change that I was trying to make was done in community and with people organizing, not necessarily through publishing. I was like, I'm never gonna, like, this is publish or perish. I'm like, my ass is gonna perish, you know. I hear you. 'Cause this shit is hard. But I also know that it's very necessary and needed work. And we thank you, we honor you for your work, for telling the truth, for speaking truth to power, and for really being a keeper of our histories and our people's ways. And we are so grateful. We think that, everyone can do it, and so we are grateful. I'm still trying, and this is really inspiring. Thank you. Yeah, I'm like, we need to put some courses out there. We might need to be like Earn Your Leisure, put the university together, you know.
For sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and get some things going, because I do think that people need this information and language, and we're constantly thinking about like, how do we bring black and brown people together?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm more of a cultural historian and practitioner more than historian, actually, but and I'm a spiritualist, so like all these things live in my being, in my memory, and like in the memory of like the spirit, you know. But I don't always have the language, and so you are giving the language, the dates, the
language
context.
is hard.
It's really hard.
It's really hard.
I'm LAUSD, and I wasn't special ed, but I was, what did they call it before? So there's special ed, but there's something right before special ed. And it's not remedial, but it's
It wasn't ELL, was it?
No, it wasn't ELL. In fact, my dad was like, no, these children speak English. You will not put them in ELL. Like, I say no to your home survey. Oh, God, it'll come to me in a second. But it was like, it starts with an R.
It wasn't remedial.
But it's not remedial. So it was like special ed, and then there's like some other courses where all of basically the people who can't read, who can't, but ain't nothing wrong with you. You just can't read, you know? So I was in those classes, and I couldn't read. I was in 9th grade and like legit could not read in real life. So like, you know, thank God I done found a pathway that works for me, you know, because I legit could not read. And I just saw the other day, my dad gifted me some pictures. My mom passed about a year and a half ago. And so my dad started giving me things, you know, for my mom, and she had all the pictures. And in this picture bank thing that he gave me, one of them is like these Dennis Rodman posters were like in my room, and I loved, you couldn't tell me shit. I love Dennis Rodman, and I just thought I, you know, love to play basketball, whatever, and you know, I love the bad boy kind of image, and you know, I was just like, yeah.
I was always good for a Laker game. I'm a bandwagon fan, I have to admit.
Yeah,
I'm not a real Laker fan.
That's okay. But so yeah, I think that more of us need to, you know, kind of need the information, because all of us can't read, all of us can't, but we need it to be able to put some force and put some fire to the work that we're doing, because the work that I'm doing, if I had no understanding of history, it's just, it don't have no power, you know, and so it's really, you know, you are needed.
Well, it's a conversation, right? Because if you just know the history, you're not doing anything with it, what's the point?
Exactly.
And that's the struggle.
Exactly.
So thank you.
Yeah. So I have a question that I like to ask, which is, you know, little Lupita, what would you say to her now? What's some advice that you have to your younger self?
Keep going. Just keep going. Keep working.
Yeah.
Keep working.
And there's a lot of, you know, one of the only student populations that's growing here in Orleans Parish is young people who are learning English as a second language. Everything else is like decreasing, you know, and that's the only student population that's growing. So what do you say to those young people who are listening, who, you know, they might be undocumented, they're probably from Central America, you know, what do you say to them?
I think the same thing that I would say to young me, right? Keep going. There are people out there. There are elders out there. There is community out there, right? Keep going. You just have to find it. Keep going.
And we are here. Look, come and find us, because we want you. You're welcomed in our community, in our family, and in our home. Yeah, get, you know, become close to an organization, get, close to people who have an understanding and who will help you grow. So yeah, we're grateful. What's in the works? Tell us what's next. What are you doing?
I hope more things. I'm working with a friend and colleague that I just shouted out, Lisa, and she is ushering me through. She is pulling me along, and hopefully into good places, into more writing. We're working now on a joint project on the university, actually, and what it means to be a Black and brown person in that university.
Nice.
So new work, hopefully, and we'll keep working.
Now, let me ask you this one last question, because I'm curious. If you're a scholar, if you're trying to, the only method of scholarship is writing?
But if you're a scholar in the academy, then yes. Right.
Right. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
If you're a scholar in the academy, maybe if you're in the arts, it might be different, right? I can't speak for those schools. But if you are in the humanities, if you're in the social sciences, then the only method of staying and being a scholar in the academy
is through writing.
Yeah, and that's a shame.
Wow. Damn, that is so one-dimensional. That is fucked up.
It is.
Wow.
It is, and I think one of the things that it does is it weeds out brilliant fucking people. The smartest people I've met have not been academics, and that is on purpose.
Yeah. Wow. Woo! All right. Well, there you have it. We can stop here. We are so grateful for you and excited about sharing this. Now, I do want to actually take us to, just in case you have something, every episode we have a rising ritual, and something that we just that is a ritual that we might have grown up with, and that we want to share with others. And I have one in case you don't, but that we like to share so that people can pass on parts of traditions. They may be our personal family traditions, but like in the past we've done things like how to actually utilize sage and like sage your house or whatever. Are there anything that you can think of that you want to share, or that you want to share maybe from your research?
I don't have one, but I would love to hear yours.
This is what I thought would happen, and so I wanted you to give some of the history if you knew it. And I feel like it's based in colonial. So I wanted to talk about copal today.
Okay.
And copal is tree resin, tree sap, and it's native to kind of the Mexica Empire or whatever, but when I smell it and when it comes to me now, I recognize it as ceremonial and something that is indigenous. But when I first came across it, I recognized it as something that they would put in the swinging thing at the Catholic Church.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
So I'm wondering, like, the Spanish, when they colonized, how they took over certain indigenous practices as well.
They took the rituals, they took the practices, they took the goods, right? And used them in their ceremonies such that they could colonize and Christianize and make that familiar, right? So Catholicism can resonate with folks if you incorporate those rituals. That's actually a very indigenous practice, right? It's what the Aztec, it's what the Nahua had been doing for centuries. That was an indigenous form of colonization, and so they took that. They built temples and churches on top of sacred sites. They used the rituals of the indigenous people such that they could further Christianity. Yeah.
So the Nahuatl people is also the tongue, is also the language, right? And the Nahuatl is, so wait, tell me the difference, if there is, or maybe I might be on the difference between the Nahuatl and Mexica.
So talk about the Nahua as like a cultural group, right? And all of these terms, in terms of like whether it's culture or state, are terms that we came up with to describe what was already there. So they're already problematic, right?
Got it.
But we're talking about Nahua as a cultural group and the Mexica as being part of a theistic state.
Got it. Okay, clear. So copal is definitely used in ceremony to not just cleanse, but I think to also invoke and like bring in and so I wanted to share that. And so we also share these things not necessarily so that we have understanding, but not necessarily so that everyone goes out and buys copal,
right?
And buys their charcoal kind of piece of charcoal to put on top, so that you instead of the priest out there or in ceremony, you're out there swinging your thing. But just so that you can kind of understand, and so that you can start to recognize the smells and understand what is happening, and also how things were colonized, right? And how we also don't want to take on practices that don't necessarily belong to us, or that we don't fully understand, and just take them over. So that's our rising ritual for this week. Copal is something that I did grow up with. I'm not Catholic, and I didn't grow up Catholic, but I do remember being at like people's quinceañeras,
some church sometime,
and it's like the swinging gold thing came around. So that's our rising ritual for this week. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for joining us for that. And thank you so much for listening to us today. We are always super grateful. Please make sure that you can check us out on YouTube, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, anywhere where you get your podcasts. Make sure that you subscribe, you rate, you tell them how amazing we are. See you soon. Love y'all. Bye.